Hey, soulmates, it is day 5 in the trial of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. He's charged with murder in George Floyd's death. And let's get to your coverage. A top Minneapolis Police Department leader says Chauvin violated police policy. Lieutenant Richard Zimmerman is the MPD's longtime homicide unit leader, and he took the stand this morning telling the jury once a person is handcuffed, their safety is the officer's responsibility. Here's a quote from his testimony. That person is yours. He is your responsibility. His safety is your responsibility. His well-being is your responsibility. Court is now adjourned for Easter break, but next week is also going to be a very important week in this case. You'll remember during the prosecution's opening statement, they let the jury know this man on your screen right now, is expected to testify. It was a shocking announcement, as he is Minneapolis Police Chief Medaria Arradondo, and he's expected to headline the prosecution's case against Derek Chauvin.
Joining us now to recap the week is our Fox Soul Black Report legal expert, civil rights attorney Sue Ann Robinson. Hey, Sue Ann.
Hey.
Thanks for joining us again. Now, we're going to take a deeper dive into the testimony from Lieutenant Richard Zimmerman and former Minneapolis Police Sergeant David Pfluger, his testimony a little bit later. But first, I want to know from you, Sue Ann, how important do you think that Police Chief Medaria Arradondo's testimony is going to be next week? It's kind of unprecedented that a police chief is actually going to be testifying for the prosecution against one of his own officers.
Absolutely. It's something that needs to be done because the blue wall of silence is coming down in this case, and it goes with the theme of what this case represents. And so the fact that the police chief is willing to get in there and say, hey, he violated policy, something we can all see with our own eyes, but still, and give that evidence against Chauvin, it's police officers testifying against police officers. Mm-hmm. They're forcing the accountability issue by saying, hey, yes, he's one of our employees, he's our brother in blue, whatever the case may be, but what he did was wrong. And I did find it interesting that a lot of the other officer witness was basically disassociating himself from him. He was like, yeah, we're in the same building, I see him coming and going, but that's not my boy, that's not my
Lieutenant
peeps.
Edwards, yeah, he really was like, I don't know him.
Yeah. Right. So wait, Sue Ann, I want to touch on that just a bit, because not only is it rare that he's headlining the prosecution's case, back to Chief Arradondo, but a police chief, a sitting police chief, testifying at all in a trial, even if it were for the defense, that is extremely rare. Right?
Absolutely, because typically there's an issue of liability pending. And so, the police unit would not want to give testimony because it would affect a civil case, but the civil case is over. As we all know, it's been settled, so it's free reign for him to testify. It's not going to affect the civil case. And I honestly think that the images are so disturbing and what he did is so disturbing. It really is turning a tide.
But in the case of Walter Scott, the police chief did get on the stand, but he was a witness for the defense. It was, what was his name? Eddie Driggers was the police chief in North Charleston. So it is rare that a police chief is called as a witness. But for the prosecution, I feel like that's the unprecedented move.
Definitely.
All right. It's on you, Demi.
All right. How do you guys, so Sue Ann, again, great to have you here. I want to know from you, how do you think the defense team is doing right now?
The defense team is on the defense. The prosecution is putting all the evidence and their facts out there. And they're also actually very strategically combating all of what the defense will say. They're kind of addressing it up front. Whatever they think the defense is going to throw at George Floyd, they're trying to combat that out front by having the girlfriend testify about their drug use and their struggles with drug abuse. They're trying to address all the elephants in the room so that when the defense comes with the argument, it's already been dispelled.
Yeah, and I think it's giving them an issue as far as the defense, because they're saying, what do we do next, right? Look, they took this away from us. They're taking this away from us. What are we going to bring to the front? Now, I do know this for a fact. When a lot of people, the world is watching. The NAACP President Derek Johnson has said this: our criminal justice system is on trial. It's on trial over the killing of George Floyd. And he feels that, look, what are your thoughts that he feels that way? And do we all kind of feel that way?
Yeah, I think this trial is where we have drawn a line in the Black Lives Matter sand. We're saying, hey, listen, over here is justice and how we need to move forward as a society dealing with this issue. Right. And over there is all the bad things that have come before this. So I really feel like this trial really represents an opportunity to have a police officer be held accountable in a big way, and hopefully transform what the relationship has been ongoing with police and Black and brown people in America.
So, Ann, let's go back to talking about Lieutenant Edwards. He was on the stand to lay the foundation for police procedure once an investigation has begun into the death of a person in police custody. He said he was sent to preserve the integrity of the scene, etc. What were your thoughts on Lieutenant Edwards' testimony today overall?
Like I said, I think that his testimony, him disassociating himself from Chauvin, really told me so much. It tells the jury so much. Like, hey, he's not saying this is my homie, this is my friend. He's not even really saying he's my coworker. He's like, he happens to be in the same building that I'm in, but I'm cut from a different cloth. So, and I think that lends him a lot of credibility as well in terms of what he was discussing with the scene, because he's saying, hey, I'm not part of this cloth that the defendant is part of. I am a police officer, but that's not my homie.
Yeah, it was interesting because he made a comment that when he got to the scene, Lieutenants Lane and King were there, and he had to instruct them to put their body cams back on. And so he seems to be, like you said, of a different ilk than the rest of them.
All right, so I want to talk about Maurice Lester Hall, right? So he was being called a key witness in the car with George Floyd on that day. His lawyers notified the court that he is, if he's asked to take the stand, he is going to plead the Fifth. He is going to invoke his Fifth Amendment right. I want to talk to you a little bit about, because that has been described as shocking or, groundbreaking, but it's not.
No, right? I mean, I feel like it's groundbreaking and shocking, maybe because he's Black. I mean, do we remember Michael Flynn, Kenneth Lay, all the people in the baseball doping scandal, all the people all the people who have invoked their Fifth Amendment right in front of Congress? Like, this is a thing. It's a constitutional right. You don't even have to unlock your cell phone for the police. So him invoking his Fifth Amendment right, if he has criminal charges pending or could be drawn into a criminal case, is absolutely appropriate. The founders put it in the Constitution that applied to us all.
Right. I know you wanted to also talk about what the Fifth Amendment is.
Right, absolutely. It's the privilege against compelled testimony against yourself. So no one should have to give testimony that could harm themselves in a court of law. And it's black and white Fifth Amendment. I mean, a lot of people talk about the Second Amendment. We talk about the 13th Amendment. Pleading the Fifth is something that goes way back, and it's not anything unusual. So the jury is going to be instructed that the fact that he's pleading the Fifth should not affect their view of the evidence.
Is that hard not for them to think that, because someone is saying, look, I don't want no part of this?
Yes and no, because the idea is this person is not testifying because they're trying to preserve possibly incriminating themselves.
Gotcha.
So it doesn't really cast an aspersion on Floyd or the defendant. It's more something that they're doing to protect themselves.
That's a really good question, because that is something that happens a lot. Like, for instance, in this case, he's not the person on trial. Derek Chauvin is. But if Derek Chauvin were to take the stand and is asked a question and he pleads the Fifth, the judge is going to tell the jury that, they're not allowed to take anything from that. But you're human.
Right, absolutely. I mean, they're not machines. Right. But what would happen with respect to Chauvin is he doesn't have to testify at all, and the jury's going to be instructed on that. In the event that he gets on the stand, obviously, he's waived that right. But right now, he has that, and they've been instructed, previously that if you never hear from him, you don't have to hear from him, because it's the state's burden to really put in all the evidence against him that he doesn't have to speak. If you never hear from him, you can't use that. And that's the structure of our criminal justice system. That's at the foundation. So they're definitely have been instructed on that. And they're humans. So you're gonna make implications, but they still have a duty to follow the law.
Right. So essentially, the defense, when it comes to Chauvin potentially testifying or not, the defense is going to have to weigh whether the jury thinks that you're hiding something, or you may get on the stand and say something that will harm you. That's the two rocks that they've got to deal with, right?
Absolutely correct. And that's always the two rocks with a defendant. Should I testify or should I not? Especially here, where Chauvin's state of mind is so critical to the case. It's an element of the offenses. So whether or not he testifies remains to be seen, but certainly if he does, I'll be watching.
So the judge ended early today, leaving the last words from Lieutenant Zimmerman on the juror's mind. Sue Ann, what type of impact do you think it will have on the jury?
I think that the police being called on the police and officers basically testifying against other officers is what, the jury is taking away. So I think they're saying, okay, there's definitely smoke here because other officers are not saying that this was okay. Other officers are in fact saying this was absolutely not okay. So now they have the EMT stacked upon lay witnesses and now police officers saying, no, none of this was correct.
Okay, well now, Sue Ann, we know you headed to Minneapolis after the show today. Your team is there, but why do you feel it's important that you be there as well?
I think it's important to really support the family of George Floyd. And support the community in Minneapolis. This is obviously something trying emotionally, and sometimes just being present also gives a certain element to trial because that's why the courts of law are open to the public, because we're watching and holding the system accountable.
So, Ann, I want to talk to you about Christopher Martin because, we have you here luckily to recap the entire week, right? And so this was one of the most, I think, emotional. Every single person, I think, every witness, every bystander, it has been really hard to watch, really emotional. And you're thinking your heart's going out to them and what they've been dealing with, right? What they saw that day. Christopher Martin, he's 19 years old. He was 18 at the time of Floyd's death. He was a cashier at Cup Foods. Of course, that is a convenience store where Floyd was accused of passing a fake $20 bill. So Christopher Martin testified that he thought Floyd didn't even know the money was fake. And that was his initial thought. He also testified that he offered to pay for Floyd's cigarettes himself. So many things he thought that, Floyd didn't deserve to get in trouble, right? He's talked about his painful guilt he's felt since the death. But he testified about something that I think a lot of people have had issue with, and I wanted to talk to you about it from a legal perspective. He testified that store policy at his job at the time mandated if you accept fake money in a transaction, you have to pay for it out of your money or your paycheck. So one, of course, emotionally, that seems excessive for someone who is barely an adult themselves making minimum wage, right?
Of course.
But two, is that legal?
No, absolutely not. And I think the State Labor Board has already given a statement on this. But you cannot withhold from someone's paycheck basically something that was based on a mistake. Like if he mistakenly took a counterfeit $20 bill, you can't withhold that from someone's paycheck. It's an absolute violation of labor law.
I was talking to Melissa and I were actually talking about this yesterday before the show. And so, being a hospitality, being a server, I've had this happen. My boss has absolutely told me if I take a counterfeit $20 bill that it comes out of my check. And I don't know if it's that's a California thing.
Yeah, California too.
Okay, but that totally has happened. I've taken counterfeit and it has been taken out of my check 100%. So I can understand the fear that comes along with not wanting, especially like you said, not making a lot of money. He just was only on the job for a few months. His mom was living upstairs. Who knows their situation? $20 could be a lot coming out of your check that might only be
3 hours worth of minimum wage, essentially, right?
But the crazy part is that, when Demi and I were having the conversation, because I myself was in the service industry, years ago, we were talking to ourselves, like, what if George Floyd had been given the $20 bill and wasn't even aware it was counterfeit? Like, has it even been determined that the bill itself was counterfeit? It's discussed as it was thought to be counterfeit, but no, I've never read or seen anything that has determined it was actually a counterfeit $20 bill. And it's just like the understanding of whether or not he knew that the bill itself was counterfeit was just what was kind of takes the breath away from you.
Yeah, that's what Christopher Martin's testimony. He didn't think he was doing something evil or nefarious. He thought he probably doesn't even know. Let me go and talk to him. And then he has to report it because he's in this weird, the transaction had already ended. And he's in this weird situation where he's worried about his paycheck. So he's got to go tell his boss, and his boss tells him to go talk to the man. And then he says, look, I'll just pay for it. You know what? Yes, take it out of my check. And at that point, his boss decided to escalate it for some reason and call the police.
Brooke, you know what? We didn't get a chance to really dive into Christopher Martin's testimony, but I feel like it was one of the most impactful, especially starting off the week. You know, my issue that I had really was that the store owner himself didn't go over to the car. You saw that Christopher Martin, they sent these young kids over to talk to a grown man in a car twice. So if you have felt so compelled about it and you felt we're so pressed about this $20 bill, in my opinion, you should have been the one to go talk man to another man to go deal with the situation, not send two young kids. A young girl went over there. Also, like, this should not have been a situation that young kids should have been dealing with anyway if it was that big of an issue.
Yeah, and on top of that, you know, I've talked to people that have businesses. You have insurance, so if someone steals something from your store or property, it's covered. If someone gives you a counterfeit, it should be covered to a certain amount. You shouldn't lead to someone losing their life and then you as a store owner having your employee go out there and try to handle this for you.
Absolutely.
Right.
So everything about that's wrong.
There's so much about that, and that's why there's laws in place, because you're getting paid for working an hour. You're not getting paid dependent on what happens throughout that hour.
I mean, the bottom line for the soulmates is two things. You ain't got to unlock your phone for the police. Okay. That's, you have Fifth Amendment rights. You ain't got to do it. And secondly, if this happens to you and you're in this situation, wherever you're working, retail, food service, it cannot be done. It's 99.9% chance that it's against your individual state's labor laws.
Interesting. Sue, and I actually want to ask you a legal question since I have you really quick. So, because I'm terrified of getting pulled over by the police. So you're saying that we don't have to open our phone. So in a situation, say we're driving and a police officer says you were on your phone. So how do we prove if, like, they say that we were on their phone, but we were using like GPS? That's always been a question I've always been interested to know.
Yeah, you don't have to unlock your phone, but you don't have to give any statement at all. You know, as long as you're complying with what the officer is asking you to do physically that he may say is for his safety. But you definitely, your cell phone and what's in your cell phone and words in your cell phone is considered testimony that can be offered against you. So you definitely do not have to show it to them unless you want to.
Right. And I think about that, but you know, I have an 8-year-old where one day he's going to drive on his own, but I'm torn. Should I have him say, I don't have to do this, or should he do it just to make sure hopefully he comes home safe? Because what if he doesn't do it and then he has to deal with other issues or something that leads to something like this? That's the fear I have as a parent.
Yeah, absolutely. And I talk to young boys all the time, young people, black and brown kids all the time. And I say your number one goal is always to get home safely. And then when you get home safely, your parents can call me or call Ben and we can work it out later. But get home safely is always the number one goal.
People have to measure invoking their civil liberties and acknowledging them with not making somebody angry. And that's unfortunate, right?
Yeah, they're just not trained at this point. There hasn't been that turning point where they're trained to de-escalate. Police are trained to maintain control. And so everything that you do that's against what they're asking is considered to be a threat.
All right, checking in with our YouTube soulmates here. So Be It One says Lieutenant Edwards was straight up Mariah Carey with it. I don't know him. Okay. Also, So Be It One says when the store clerk said it was blue, I assumed it was washed with some jeans. Dina Jackson also tapped in and said in Missouri they told fast food workers the same thing. Also, if your drawer's short, they're deducting it for your check. So it seems as if a few people have also experienced the same thing in their workplace as well. Soulmates, keep the soul, keep the soul, okay, and keep the commentary rolling in the meantime. Romeo, let our soulmates know what's coming up next.
Coming up, soulmates, Sue Ann's going to help us recap explosive testimony in the trial of Derek Chauvin. That's next on Fox Soul's Black Report.